Bloomberg News. But before we get started on the panel, I just want to give 3 rounds of shout-outs and thanks. First, thank you to the various co-organisers and volunteers and members of the Stony Brook community who have made this event possible. We are very, very lucky to have such a supportive group. I don't think I've organised an event that's ran as smoothly in terms of setup as this one has this morning, and that's because every time I turned one way or another, there was somebody there asking how they could help. So it's a lovely reflection on the community, the people who are here, and I am very appreciative, and I know the others who've been working to make this conference as well. Secondly, I'd like to thank the co-sponsors and the broader friends of the community. As you can see, we have a range of different groups, ranging from the very small to the very large, as well as some media co-sponsors who are supporting the importance of this conference historically in the public narrative. So we'd like to thank everybody who has offered to share their support. If you are part of groups or organisations that would like to support this conference in the future, please let us know. Obviously, financial support is greatly appreciated because we work very hard to keep this conference open. There are only suggested donation fees, no required fees. Obviously, travel expenses can't be helped, but we also work very hard to provide food for everybody and social events and to make sure that the program is very rich for you. So if you can support that way, that would be wonderful, either individually or organisationally. But even if you don't, simply just offering your support as an organisation or your time as a volunteer is always valuable. So please think about doing that. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for making it out. I think this is going to be, again, a historic moment if you think about where MMT was even a year ago compared to where it is now. We had, I think, Mario Draghi just 2 days ago say that this should be considered as part of the new kind of realm of economic ideas. So I think the progression from being ignored to ridiculed to fought to ultimately conceded the entire ballgame is going pretty well. So let's just keep pushing, I think, is the sort of moral of the story. And with that, I'll hand it over to the first panel. Thank you.
That was actually a really good point on that note of how MMT has proliferated. I think we actually at Bloomberg News ended up making a spreadsheet, like an Excel spreadsheet, every single time someone applied on MMT this year. And it worked itself up to about 50 people, including the IMF chief economist, the former IMF chair, tons of billionaires wanted to talk about it, for whatever, Warren Buffett, Carl Icahn. So it seems to have really blossomed this year in the media and in politics and government. I'm really glad that we have this great panel who can speak to kind of every aspect of that. So just for introductions, we're going to start from just the end here. Brian Romanchuk is a consultant and author at bondeconomics.com. He was a quantitative analyst at BCA Research and headed the quant fixed income team at Caisse de dépôt et placement in Quebec, which is one of the largest pension funds in Canada. He was also an academic in control systems theory. To his right, we have Alexandra Scaggs. She's a senior writer at Barron's and formerly Bloomberg, FT, and Wall Street Journal, and she specializes in markets and credit. Bill Mitchell, to the right, to your left, doesn't really need much introduction to his audience. I think he's one of the founders of MMT, professor, and he wrote the textbook, co-wrote the textbook on MMT, which sold out in its first run, as Bloomberg reported on that. And then to my left, Glenn Hadden, portfolio manager at Alpha Dime, focused on US, Canadian, Japanese, European bond markets, previously at Morgan Stanley, and partner at Goldman Sachs, specializing in interest rates, bonds, and U.S. Treasuries. So we have a pretty great panel here for you guys today. I think the format, what we might do is start with presentations. So it's about 15-20 minute presentations, and then we can open it up to discussion. discussion questions. So maybe we'll start at the end with Brenda.
Katia? Yeah, we're going to start with Bill, actually. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So we're actually going to start with Bill.
Sorry, Brian. Thanks very much to Rowan and his team for organising this. It's a lot of stuff up here. It took a while to get out of here, but we got here. And, thanks to all of you for coming and supporting the development of our work over the years. It's starting to become very non-linear. But it's a great thing to see. So I have the advantage of knowing what happened at the beginning. And at the beginning we used to, there were just a few of us, so few of us that we used to laugh when we met up, and we could count the MMTs on one hand. And we got very excited when we spilled over onto our second hand. And initially the way, because of the nature of the people involved, Warren and myself and Randy and Matt, and some of the younger graduate students that were coming through, like Scott and others, excuse me if I forget. It's a long time ago, 25 years. We first of all started, who was listening? Well, we first of all thought that given our native environment that we would talk to academics. And so as academics should do. And we, in good faith, we talked to our colleagues. And, that was a huge mistake. Because up at that point I hadn't really studied social psychology. I'd done philosophy of science in my undergraduate studies, and I knew about paradigm shift, and I knew about paradigm resistance, and I knew about that stuff, but I hadn't really embedded it into my own world and my own strategic way of thinking about my work and our work in this case. And what we came up with was dead ends, abuse, vilification, and we got nowhere. And so then 2004 came along, and so this was 10 years almost into the program of us sort of trundling around the world, going to conferences and stuff, and being on some panel and talking about our stuff, and just not getting very far. And then I've been to, because I'm interested in programming and interested in IT and stuff, I've been to a seminar at my university in Newcastle, in Australia, and I've been to a seminar on blog technology. And there were no blogs much then, it was just beginning. And soon after, the inner team, if you like, at the small number to one hand, we used to meet up regularly, at least once a year, distant separators, of course. And I remember sitting at that particular meeting was Warren and Randy. And I said out of the blue, I said, look, I'm going to start. I said to the assembled two, me being the third, that I'm going to start a blog. And if we had a camera and looked at the Randy's face was precious. He sort of, I won't say what he said, but I explained to them that we'd been bashing our heads up against a brick wall for 10 years almost, maybe 9, and that we needed a different strategy. And that I sensed that this blog infrastructure was going to take us to a different audience, and an audience where we could grow the the ideas and the understandings of the broader population, and by bypassing the conventional interchanges that native to an academic. And that's how that started, the social media stuff. And so then we started to get all of these activists involved. And this is, and I really believe, because of the nature of technology, this is the first body of economic thought that has grown through activists, through non-academic people starting to become empowered by the ideas that we were producing, that they could see that they were, in a way, that there was incredible dissonance around that time. The neoliberal period of being around for maybe 2 or 3 decades, depending which country you live in, and of different severities depending which country you're in. But we were starting to twig that this wasn't working for people anymore. That the promise of neoliberalism of wealth for all and everyone was going to be included on the wealth train, that wasn't exactly working out. This was pre-GFC, which even accentuated that. And so that sort of growth. Not the growth we're seeing now, but it started the critical mass emerging. Then the GFC came along, and I like to think I can make good predictions, but I got it really wrong. I thought that the GFC would be really the nail in the coffin for the mainstream economics, macroeconomics. But I thought it was such a fundamental failure of the mainstream body of work was taught in our universities all around the world, in different levels of mainstreamness, but taught all around the world. And I thought that it was such a fundamental failure of that body of work, and it's such a fundamental ratification, without putting tickets on us, of the sort of things we were talking about, that it would only be a matter of time. But dominant paradigms, even those that in Imre Lakatos' terms are degenerative, which is mainstream macroeconomics is, have a real habit of hanging on to the death. And so it took some more effort to really get the shift occurring. And what's happening now, I think, over the last 3 or 4 years, in terms of who's listening, my invitations that I get almost every day, I get some invitation to do something. And living in Australia makes it a little bit difficult, so you're on the road a lot. But my invitation list is changing. It's no longer community groups and progressive social science departments and things like that. You're starting invitations from central banks and from the main players in the financial markets and the main journalists, not just the fringe journalists. And for example, and I've forgotten, I'm sort of out of whack with time at the moment for travel, but last Monday I was in Paris talking to one of the biggest investment funds. Then I was guest of PIMCO, the largest fixed income bond trader in the world. And that sort of thing is happening now more and more. And what they've worked out, and I'm sure Glenn will be able to provide the hands-on experience to say whether I'm correct or not. And what they've worked out, this is what they've told me anyway, that they now feel by the mainstream in my profession. And they go, if you think about what happened in the GFC, the mainstream economists who were all saying, well, bond yields are going to go through the roof because of the deficits, and that interest rates are going to go through the roof because of the fear of inflation, and QE would cause accelerated inflation in its own right. And those predictions come directly out in the Keynesian model. Don't get it wrong. That's what the mainstream teach their students to believe. And of course, you know, the training strategies of a lot of those guys being generic was to get out of bonds because they were worried about capital losses and to get into real assets because of they thought that there'd be massive capital gains because of the inflation. Of course, none of that happened. And so they're now working out that they've lost bags of money, and they wanted then have discovered that there was this other body of crackpots like me telling them that they shouldn't have been doing any of that. So, and that particular audience of who's listening has given me a bit of an issue because when I start off those meetings by saying, we're not here to make you money, because the last thing I want to do is to become a pawn of the financial markets. I actually want to extinguish the financial markets, get rid of them. But the reality is that 120 activists in a small church hall in a suburb of Newcastle do not influence the policy debate, and the CEO of PIMCO in Europe does influence the policy debate. And if I'm trying to shift rhetoric and narrative, then I really have to speak to those people. That's the internal justification I've come to. The other thing about who's listening is I can now tell you that Macmillan, the largest technical publisher in the world, told me in London on Tuesday that they're now commissioning the second edition of our textbook. And Macmillan took a huge risk in that because they are the premier textbook publisher in the world. And if you had seen the normal textbook process, they send out the brief and then they get responses, you know, the design of it, a few sample chapters, and they then get responses from a panel of people who are reviewers, and of course, you know, the panel of reviewers that we deal with are mostly mainstream economists. And I would love to publish the confidential reviews we've got. They are brilliant in being pathetic. And they exemplify everything that's wrong with mainstream economics. But Macmillan, the point is that Macmillan took a chance, a really big risk. But they also sense from their outreach, their marketing processes, going out to colleges and speaking to academics, that they were really disenchanted with the mainstream books, and that there was nothing there, there was a lacuna there. There was nothing to, so they had to sort of use the mainstream books, but they were really unhappy with it. Students were increasingly protesting about their economics courses. And that motivated them to take the risk, and so they're really happy now. And so we've now got a pedagogy that's available for colleges and universities that gives us a real grounding now in mainstream university teaching. The last few things I'll say are that the dangers of liberalism, and these things that I'm really keenly aware of at the moment, in a way protecting our baby, because I don't want it to be hijacked. But for those who have studied economics, we're experienced at hijacks. And the great general theory by John Maynard Keynes was basically hijacked by the orthodoxy that he was opposing. And we then had a body of work that was the mainstream that was allegedly Keynesian, but was nothing to do with Keynes. And so I'm and you can see it happening already, the guys like Summers and coming out, Larry Summers and Krugman and the softer new Keynesians coming out. We knew it all along, there's nothing new here, you know, a bit of a manipulation of the new Keynesian model will get MMT results, nothing to worry about. And they're making statements about fiscal dominance and as the paradigm shifting, as if it was their idea, as if they believed that all along, as if this came straight out of their model. And so there's a sort of danger that they'll just hijack it. And that the essence of our work will be subsumed back into the dominant orthodoxy, and it will be impoverished and rendered, I won't say because I just said it, but that's sort of too male, you know. The other worry I've got, and I know Warren shares this worry, is that there's also a danger that the core body of work will be perverted for party political purposes in a particular jurisdiction, say the US. And what I mean by that is that I'm increasingly seeing statements that are designed to placate or assuage political issues within a particular country. The sensitivities of Democrat versus Republican interchanges in this country, for example, and then trying to make those statements as if they're MMT statements. Now, I'm quite happy for some people to announce that they're now post-MMT in the same way there was post-Keynesian thinking. But I'm really unhappy about the core body of work being manipulated and reinterpreted as if it's the core body of work still to suit a political agenda. That's something I'm really going to be careful to, I was going to say fight against, but that's too strong. I'm vigilant. And the other thing is that we also can't get too ahead of ourselves. And those, last year at the conference, there was an air that there was a success in there. And people would be saying, look, we're winning. Well, we're not winning anything yet. Because this is an academic body of work that has profound empowerment for normal people to understand the way in which the policy process can evolve, and in my view it's an empowerment of our democracies to stop our politicians lying to us about the essential characteristics of the policy levers that they pull and push. And so we only win, and win is it's just a word in this context that I'm using it. We only really win when there's a paradigm shift. And if you've studied philosophy of science, you know what that means. It's a long, drawn-out process. It took 30 or 40 years for neurogenesis, for example, from the day the first PhD came out saying that the brain could repair itself, to the period then of him being vilified, shut out of the profession, the senior professors who believed the brain couldn't be repaired, fix itself, until they all died off, and then in the late 90s, 35 years later, there was a consensus based upon the growing evidence dissonance that we could repair ourselves, our brains. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, all of the clinical practice was based upon a false presumption about our brains capacity. People suffered, they got the wrong treatment. So we only really win, and when we are the dominant paradigm within the teaching programs of our universities. We're nowhere near that yet. We've just got a textbook out. We're hardly anybody has adopted that textbook for formal programs yet. And so let's, I urge everybody to be really happy about what's going on. I urge people to be really pushy. I'm a real pushy sort of character. Push the agenda, talk to people, but let's not get ahead of ourselves and be, that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. There were a lot of questions that popped up in my head. I went just as you were talking about the paradigm shift and where we are, so we've talked about the Overton window. In the last year, MMT has also been tied up with socialism, with the Green New Deal, with a lot of political things happening in DC. So that's another thing that I will ask you after the presentations. And maybe next we'll go to Glenn.
Thank you. I did have a slide deck, I'm not sure if that's.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I just have a couple of YouTube videos. Sorry, my class whole paper was ready to do it. That's okay. Sorry.
Okay. Early unexpectedly. I've been introduced, but I'm Alex Scaggs. I write for Barron's right now. I've worked for the Wall Street Journal and for Bloomberg and FT most recently. And I will say that I'm not here in an official capacity or representing Barron's, because some of you might know they have a very different institutional view about federal debt. So I do want to make clear that this is just me. I've worked a lot of different places in the financial press, and it's been really, really fascinating to see this year what the discourse has started to look like. I know it sounds a little trite, but if you look actually at the Google Trends map, it really, you can just tell, as soon as that discussion started in March, the amount of Google searches for MMT, what is it? What's it mean? Really shot up very quickly. And I think that, I'm sorry, I have to check my notes. I think one of the most interesting things is not just that the discussion is changing and the academic discussion is changing, but also that the press itself has changed. And I think this is sort of the stuff I can talk about because I'm not an academic, I'm not a trader or necessarily an expert, but I have seen a lot of the ways that the press has changed over the past, say, decade. And I think there have been really three major trends. One is polarization. So, that sort of political aspect that we talked about. There are good and bad things about that, right? Like, on the good side, I think that MMT is a framework that lets people talk about power and talk about political power in a really sort of interesting and subversive kind of way. And the polarization of the press and the polarization just about policy conversations sort of has allowed people to talk about ideology in all sorts of realms that it wasn't in before. So, people used to think that economics just wasn't an ideological academic area, which I think is really funny. But people really thought that it was sort of above politics. They thought, okay, these people are like the high priests of our society, and they're kind of untouchable. And I think that the way that the conversation has changed is that people now realize, like, oh, this is very ideologically weighted, even before. And so that sort of has allowed not just people on the fringes, but even people sort of closer to the mainstream to start talking about MMT and to start talking about policies and power. And so it's been interesting because it's also happened on both sides of the spectrum, right? To speak specifically about the US, I mean, we have a Breitbart reporter who's really, sort of more realistic, I guess, about money creation and that sort of stuff. And then on the other hand, I know FT Alphaville, my former employer, has written about this stuff a lot too. And so the polarization, I think, allows people to see, I guess, the ideology of money. And the second thing that started happening was the decentralization. So, like, the sort of mass media outlets, I think, are a little bit less powerful than they used to be. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I think, as sort of the institutions themselves become a little bit more weakened by social media and the ability of journalists to sort of like speak directly to readers and not be quite so edited. It's allowed two things. It's allowed more independent thought from individual journalists, and it's also allowed, well, the other part, I guess the bad side of this is that a lot of journalists aren't particularly confident in their understanding of economics. And so I think that a lot of times journalists will just sort of fall back onto like, what is Paul Krugman saying? Just because they're not confident. And when I learned about MMT, one of the ways it helped me was that it actually helped me understand money as a mechanism of power, a mechanism of political power, and that sort of reoriented the entire policy landscape from my perspective. And I've actually been allowed to talk about it in public, which is great, partly because the decentralization happened. So that also, I think, good things and bad things, definitely opportunities. And then there has been a lot more specialization too, right? Like the reason I ended up learning about MMT and the reason I ended up, thinking that it made sense was because I cover markets and, sort of seeing a lot of the establishment economic thought and seeing how it didn't necessarily match up with what was going on in markets. Sort of opened up, again, an opportunity for me to learn about the subject. But what was interesting, I guess, about the March and February news cycle was that it wasn't necessarily a ground-up thing, right? Like, it was Paul Krugman writing about it, Stephanie Kelton responding, and the back and forth there, that then actually made its way into Wall Street before it made its way into the financial press more broadly. So a lot of people ended up writing about MMT because it was asset managers and traders and these other sorts of like powerful people that were asking the analysts, like, what is MMT? Is this okay? And then the analysts themselves would end up writing about it, and then it would make its way into the press that way. Which is really interesting because I think, what that shows most is sort of a lack of confidence, again, on most members of the press. If you have to write about complicated things, it can be scary, you don't have a PhD. So as soon as someone starts talking about it in that sort of format, it's a lot easier to say, okay, this is our hook. And that's especially from the financial press side of things. I think that the press in general could do a better job writing about money and writing about economics within that context, just because a lot of like the Washington Post coverage and the other mainstream areas have just sort of echoed these gatekeepers, right? Like the Paul Krugmans of the world or the Larry Summerses of the world. And so there is they're trying to maintain a consensus in my view, but because of the trends in journalism that I was talking about before, I think that the consensus itself is just harder to maintain. That again creates opportunities for MMT and other types of heterodox ideologies. Also, it didn't hurt, again, that markets themselves have completely rebutted and refuted everything that the establishment economists said. If you look at Japan, Japan should be experiencing hyperinflation by like a standard economic perspective. And again, paying attention, seeing what's actually going on in markets in the world, and comparing that to what people are saying, again, is really helpful. And I do, let's see, talk a little bit about the news cycle. And the misconceptions, of course, are still around, right? The gatekeepers and the academic establishment is still is really kind of dismissive in a lot of ways when they're writing for the public about MMT and about the framework, which is really interesting because they never actually engage with the ideas in these pieces. And I think actually James Montier from GMO did a really good job talking about why that was and what was behind that. Because a lot of it is just, those people aren't, establishment, they're not one of us, so they must be wrong. They must have these crazy ideas, right? But that, and this is from the perspective of the people, writing, the sort of gatekeepers themselves. But yeah, I think that it's been really interesting to see that kind of pushback, because if you are an independent thinking person, then reading that stuff and then reading the actual content and the actual ideas behind MMT, the ideas behind MMT make a lot more sense. And that's another really good thing that it has on its side, because it's understandable and you can talk to real people, and it is a framework that's meant to empower people. And I think that the trend's going one direction, and that trend is that people are getting more and more fed up with the establishment gatekeepers, with Larry Summers, with all of these other people in Washington. And as they read these, the actual sources, hopefully, there are a lot of good ones out there, they will actually see that it makes more sense than what's going on now. Like personally, or what the establishment is saying now. Personally, I didn't understand money markets at all until I went to MMT, and I was like, oh, this actually makes sense. Thinking about money as a private creation creates a lot of really confusing ideologies and frameworks, right? We actually have a recent example of this in repo markets, which are extremely arcane and very confusing. And you can tell because it was all like Bitcoiners and financial journalists that were talking about it, and also gold bugs. And a couple of establishment financial journalists started talking about something that happened in markets last week and calling it a Fed bailout, which was really not accurate and also confusing for real people. And real people didn't really understand why they were saying that. But it was really interesting to see because a lot of people ended up arguing with this journalist. Actually ended up responding with a thread that Nathan Tangas, who's here, wrote. It was a really good thread. But the only reason I knew that this wasn't right was because I learned MMT. So the accuracy of the framework and the usefulness of the framework, I really can't overemphasize in terms of things that it has on its side. And in terms of ways to sort of talk to the public about MMT going forward, I do have some ideas about this, because a lot of the criticisms about it are people saying, oh, well, what are the details? Like, how would you implement this? How would a jobs guarantee work? And I'm not actually sure that people are looking for, I don't think they're actually looking for the wonky details when they say that. I think they're looking for examples, and I think they're looking for narratives. Because I do think a lot of these ideas can be a little hard to grasp. You're sort of talking about a jobs guarantee. Oh, what does that mean? My boss has never out loud fired me. What does that mean from like a real on-the-ground perspective? And I think that going forward, a way for them to reach out to the public would just be, okay, this is a narrative. This is a narrative about what a Green New Deal would look like. This is a narrative about what a jobs guarantee would look like. And giving people things to hang on to along those lines, I think would be really helpful. And I think that's pretty much all I have. Do we have our slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, and sorry for the...
We're going to go into Glenn. I just wanted to say that I'm so glad you're on this panel, because I think as reporters were, we have a duty in a lot of ways to inform the public, but also why not? If there's this theory, I've always found that really difficult as a reporter because you're a curious person. You want to pitch stories. You've seen this thing called MMT. What's that about? And you pitch it, an immediate reaction from quote unquote gatekeepers can be, oh, that's a marginal thing, or that's not something to write about, whatever the reaction is. So that's definitely changing. I'm really curious to hear in a little bit what your thoughts are on that. Right now, we're going to go into a presentation. Cool.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. I think the work that we're all doing is actually having a lot of impact, and baby steps, but every day seems one more step forward. So, MMT, the magic money tree, as skeptics talk about. Now, if I could comment, Alexandra, something you said kind of rings very true. There is, MMT essentially is the brain of the body, the bond market is the muscle. And very few people in the world understand the sovereign and government bond markets. And in fact, having worked in them for 30 years, I think a lot of people who actually invest in them don't understand the government bond markets either. That's part of the problem we have. Bill, what you said, I understand your frustration of being kind of a lone voice in the wilderness, because talking to academics with egos, try talking to billionaire investors who think they are smarter and more knowledgeable than you, makes it quite challenging to get your point across. So as I give my presentation about MMT to, it's literally hundreds now of investors, policymakers, co-workers, colleagues in the financial system, it usually goes like this. The first meeting we have, people kind of sit there like this with this utter scorn on their face saying, this guy is crazy. And after refuting all their questions and comments, the second iteration is, you know what, explain this to me again. And the third go around usually is, you know what, this all kind of makes sense to me now. So usually it takes about 3 times to get around to people, but it's actually working. The first problem we have with people is to understand in the bond market. The concept of debt. Obviously, history is littered with overburdened borrowers, and you wind up, in the case of sovereign bond markets, like Greece or like Argentina. And so debt is a very scary word in the sovereign bond space. And so for those of you who have kids, or those of you in your early 20s, you probably understand who Sully is from Monsters, Inc. Looks very scary, but once you get to know the character, it's actually not quite scary at all. The biggest problem we have, is fighting as to what Bill commented on is kind of the conventional way of thinking. Whether it's from academia, whether it's from previous instances of different regimes, such as being on the gold standard, we're trying to equate household debt with sovereign debt and their limits and capacities from people's own experiences. That's the biggest problem. So I recall when I was a kid, there were these ads in newspapers and sometimes on TV, depending on how old you remember, saying 9 out of 10 doctors recommend this brand of cigarettes to relax your lungs. Obviously, it's a crazy thesis, but that's what people have assumed, and that's what was the way of thinking. In fact, when I give the speech in Europe, I use the concept of Galileo, father of modern physics, who was basically said the Earth revolved around the sun, not the other way around, and of course the Catholic Church threw him in jail for 30 years. So basically the point I'm making is that, who's listening? Certainly the financial markets have started, but it's really, really early. And then really the biggest hurdle is because of this embedded thought process, which really comes down to either personal experience with debt, or the classic neoliberal teachings from training. So, again, okay, let's see this here. The biggest challenge that I have is you have what otherwise are credible people making claims about the problems or risks around sovereign debt. Obviously, this was candidate Trump in his picture from early 2016. I think that he may be more on board with MMT than he was back then. But other people who have other credibility.
Great, just go on. Otherwise, people. Good. Just leave it as it is.
Okay, perfect. So, as we said, the battle we have is trying to fight against people who otherwise would have credibility. Obviously, the President of the United States, like Hadden, certainly has 45 million Twitter followers, so he's going to have some degree of following credibility with what he says. But it's not even just the Republican Party. I mean, other people who have enormous credibility have had the same issues, the same problems with government debt. This is obviously President Obama from in his first term in office, similar sort of item. And of course, you can go into other entities too, to very well-known billionaires talking about problems with government debt and government deficits. So this is the kind of the problem we have in helping to adopt the MMT theory into the mainstream, is that the otherwise credible people just don't understand it. So fortunately, it's moving forward, but again, this is the hurdles we have. So some of the classic problems that we have, and there's some examples that are just so overwhelmingly glaring, I thought I'd bring them up here. People who live in the financial markets have seen this chart, I'm sure, a dozen times. It's just a graph of the Fed's balance sheet from what's called the onset of the GFC up until a couple years ago, and of course the S&P 500 tracks almost perfectly. The correlation is almost 1. The correlation and causality are not exactly the same thing, and that's part of the problem. There's an assumption that the monetary lever is what drives wealth and utility in society, whereas I think if you really appreciate this, I'll get this in a second, all the monetary authority really does is shift the income savings preference. They don't create it, they don't create wealth per se. All they do is shift savings preferences around. So as you can see, certainly there was some correlation, but doesn't necessarily mean causation. And if you look what happened, even in the Federal Reserve meetings last year, when the Fed had already begun shrinking its balance sheet, the Federal Reserve understands this. Chairman Jay Powell even said, I think that the runoff of the balance sheet's being smooth and has served its purpose. We don't see the balance sheet runoffs as causing a significant problem. This is back in the autopilot days from 2017. And of course, after this meeting, the stock market fell 8% in a matter of 4 trading sessions. So the point I'm making is that there still is this constituency within the financial markets who think that there is omnipotence on the monetary authority, where the fiscal authority is not as important or is certainly as constrained in their abilities to inject liquidity, money or wealth. The second aspect that is really frustrating to me, if you recall back in August of 2011, the U.S. government was downgraded from AAA to AA high by Standard & Poor's. Obviously, for any of us in the room who understand MMT, it's completely irrelevant unless there are collateral agreements based on this, but they're not, so therefore it's irrelevant. But people use that and look at what happened in the ensuing week when the stock market sold off roughly 10%, and think that there was a causality or correlation between the U.S. government's debt rating and therefore financial performance. And so as a result, if the U.S. were to get downgraded again, the stock market would fall, blah, blah, blah. But in actuality, if you look at what really happened on the bottom slide, it's really kind of hard to see. But in June and July is when the European government bond markets started to blow up, kind of early pre-Greece default. The bottom line's a graph of the Italy credit default swap going from 150 to almost 400 basis points. That is actually what caused the stock market sell-off. If you recall back in July of 11, all we talked about was the grand bargain of the debt ceiling debate between Speaker Boehner and President Obama. So again, another common misconception is that credit ratings of sovereigns in a floating fiat currency has some actual bearing on government's ability and desire to spend. Okay, so if you can appreciate now the concept of fiscal and monetary policy being part of the same body. So no, Chairman Powell and Secretary Richard are not conjoined twins, but it's important to understand, again, the interplay between fiscal and monetary policy, and obviously understand what's more relevant. As I mentioned before, the monetary lever magic essentially is done via the intertemporal savings channel. There's no actual aggregate demand created. That's why I think at the very bottom, which one's more dominant, and I tried to make the head of Secretary Mnuchin actually a little bigger to illustrate the more relative importance of fiscal policy. So just to kind of put it into real world perspective, and Alexandra mentioned this a second ago, there was a period last week of immense dysfunction in the repo markets. Again, I'll get to that in just 1 second, but what happened, or what's happened over the past 2 years, the Fed's balance sheet has reduced and shrunk by roughly $1 trillion on of securities that roll off the balance sheet. So what's ended up happening is either, right, the Fed has decided to own less securities, or the Treasury decided to issue more securities, or actually what's happened has been both. And what's happened more acutely has been the Treasury decided they wanted to increase the Treasury general account holdings at the Federal Reserve, which effectively is a withdrawal of liquidity to withdrawal reserves and as issuing essentially a collateral. So what that did, and why this is important, is, and this is the graph, you can see, if you look on the bottom, you see the red transitions to green, and the white line here that kind of moves from the southwest to the northeast quadrant. What this is a graph of the spread of U.S. Treasury general collateral relative to the interest on excess reserve the Fed pays, which is a hallmark of the floor system. Traditionally, especially when the Fed owns roughly a fifth of U.S. Treasury outstanding, Treasury debt trades at a premium, and therefore collateral trades at a lower level. What's happened, as you can see, is we've gone to a point where Treasury collateral now trades at a premium, higher yield than interest reserves. So one of two things is happening. Either the Fed does not own enough, or the Treasury is trying to issue too much. But the really important thing about this, and this is the last thing I want to say, for those of you who are policymakers or future policymakers, a whole bunch of regulations are put into the banking system post-GFC, such as LCR, liquidity coverage ratio, SLR, supplementary leverage ratio. But what that has basically done, right, is that essentially makes Treasury securities, which are the lever of fiscal policy, which is the tool of MMT, and makes these entities post capital against them, right? So in a perfect world, we would not be constrained by the Liberty Bond Act of 1917 or the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, but we are, okay? So the point I'm making is that in this new environment, theoretically, previously, Treasury securities, Fed reserves, and cash money essentially were fungible. They all have the same utility to every single participant in the universe. That's not the case now because of these new financial regulations. And so what you had was, as the Treasury Department decided they wanted to issue a whole bunch of T-bills to up their general account balance in the Federal Reserve, the money markets had a hard time investing in that. Now, again, why is this important? It's actually extremely important, because what that means is fiscal policy, which is the tool of aggregate demand creation, is now constrained by bank capital, which is crazy, right? It's absolutely crazy for the governments who is the monopoly issuer of currency to constrain themselves by having a financial system that can intermediate government bond borrowing. So for those of you who are policymakers or future policymakers, it's absolutely worthwhile thinking about how you regulate banks' balance sheets with respect to Treasury securities, as Treasury securities are the tool of policy for government borrowing and therefore functioning for MMT. I'll leave it at that, but if there's any questions afterwards, happy to answer.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm really looking forward to asking you how people can make money from MMT. So we're going to go down to Brian's presentation, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A.
This is live? Okay. Do I have my slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not
Well, anyways, I'll just start talking. I'm Romanchuk. I've been writing, and what I'm talking about is about.
closer to your mouth.
What?
Thank you.
Oh, okay, sorry. I write. As a writer, I would divide the audience for MMT into three groups. There's academics, these sort of professional readers, and then you have the broad public, which is sort of everyone else.
You get it off the mouse.
Oh, that's good. Well, okay, I won't worry about the slides. Oh, okay. Hey, great. Anyway, so I will restart. So I would say I would divide the audiences into three. One, you have academics, professional, and for the professional, it's mainly finance, but it could be economists at a union, it could be, if you do have economists embedded in industrial firms, although it seems to be less than it used to be back in the 60s and 70s. And then you have the broad public. And if I can get next. How do I know it? Basically, over my career, I've written for these audiences. In the 1990s, I was in academic and control systems engineering, which essentially applied mathematics, and the overlap with economics would be that's actually optimal control theory for neoclassical macro. They've sort of taken 1960s control systems and bent it completely, so it's completely unreadable. I was a grumpy academic. I was unhappy with trends in academia. I said, let's go off in the industry and make some money. And so I went to BCA Research, which is an independent research firm, and I was doing quantitative tools there, but I learned how to write. And so I learned how to write for a professional audience. BCA doesn't, it's subscriptions are on the thousands of dollars. It's aimed at institutional investors, so it's for that professional audience. And then since 2013, I've been writing a blog and writing, I have specialty books, and it's hitting the broader audience. On the academic side, I'm just going to do the North American football parlance. I'm just punting on first down, no comment. Academic economics is just dysfunctional, but I'm just an outsider. I don't really know the details, so I'm just going to skip that. But that's an obvious job, but Bill Mitchell did discuss that. Then we're into the professional users. And there could. Oh, okay. There could be people with economics backgrounds, but if you look at fixed income, there's a lot of PhDs from physical sciences, mathematicians, people like me, so they don't necessarily have an economics background. And in my case, you didn't have to unlearn things. Typically, if you go into government, you have to unlearn anything you learned in economics 101, called interest rates. But there's also, it's finance, you have financial media, there's other smaller audiences who know a bit about economics or are interested in fiscal policy. And to an extent, you could say central bankers. Central bankers are sort of an overlap between academia and sort of professional finance. They're a good source of free research for those of us who don't have access to research libraries. They're very good, but they're very much tied to the mainstream neoclassical agenda. Central bank money is the gravy train behind mainstream research budgets. So, but the thing is that central banks also, unlike the academics, are actually accountable to being right occasionally, and so they're actually forced to think about things, and so they're some of the researchers are open. Then the broad public, I'm sort of saying the broad public who aren't experts in economics. I mean, you could have someone who's not one of those roles, who has a PhD in economics, who went to work in advertising, but basically people who know, they're coming into economics, and they want to learn about economics. Then why do they want to learn about economic theory? Because why do they want to learn about economic theory? There was a financial crisis, and there's a whole genre where economics went wrong. It's interesting, it's funny, and so the economics blogs, which arose, and MMT was a big part. So now it's migrated into Twitter, but so you have a lot of people interested in the financial crisis because it hit everyone was interested in that. Then you have the people who are concerned citizens about political economy issues. So they're interested in politics, fiscal policy, changing things, and what are the limits of government action. It's come to the forefront because last year I saw my sales spike, and I don't want to name the name, but AOC was a big part of that. And the other angle is there's an overlap with finance. You have people interested in finance and also money, because you have the Austrian money bug. So talking about money is a big thing in sort of personal finance. So people have an interest in when they probably shouldn't. As a disclaimer, I have a book, Abolish Money from Finance. It's a bit of a rant. Anyways, the professionals in finance, the thing with writing for them is if you're in finance, you're selling research to a financial firm. If you're a financial firm, you're selling a product. You're selling research or you're selling your management expertise. You do not get into political arguments with the potential clients. This is a bad sales technique. So there, and that's it. This is the reality of it. And the other thing, internal politics, two opponents in the room to get three opinions and everything. It's people don't agree. There's always closed room fights over views. You don't want, in addition to disagreements about the economic outlook, you don't want to layer political disputes on top of that. So basically, in finance, there's a very narrow Overton window of acceptable political discourse, which is basically, establishing parties. So, but you're not supposed to be partisan. Like in the United States, even though, like I'm coming from Canadian prairie populist background, I don't see a big difference between establishment Democrats and Republicans. Hillary Clinton, Romney, yeah, what's the difference? But there's probably more cultural, but there's a big fight between, Democrats and Republicans here. Even though from the outside I said there isn't a big difference in them, but there is, people are angry about this, and generally speaking, you have to stay clear. So there's a self-censorship talking about politics. And if you're doing government bonds, it's a bad idea to have an agenda against the government and say something's bonds because the prime minister is an idiot. It's sort of not done. I mean, obviously you can say, well, there's a political bias against need for capitalism, so you can say, yes, there's a pro-capitalism bias, but basically, political economy is generally avoided. So you want to avoid political economy discussions. And the big exception would be Austrian economics, where they exist a bit in academia. There's a few, they're not, thick on the ground anymore in academia, but they're big in finance. They're fairly political, but then again, they're usually precious metal funds. I mean, that's the thing. You're selling collectibles to, libertarians. You got to go with the shtick. It's a marketing shtick. You have to pretend to believe it. If you want to sell gold, you got to be Austrian. So that's this is the constraint. And so your marketing is better if you're a mousetrap or how do I make money off this. And people like mathematical models. It's there's a bias. People love mathematics. I mean, I was pointing out people love mathematical models. I generally developed a hatred of mathematical models. I haven't developed things, but people like them, but they don't actually want to read it. Usually, if you're writing for an audience that's not academic, you have one equation, you stick it in the box, and maybe a few people will read it. Because typically what happens is you'll have math PhDs who can sort of reverse engineer your text to know what you're talking about. You don't need to explain to them. And the thing is, if you try explaining them halfway, you're just going to mangle it and make people mad because you're not doing your notation right. So you just do a block, but people like the mathematical model. The way you present it is you say, this is the results of the model. You give them a graphical output, here it is, and then they'll maybe talk to you about it later. They do like mathematical models, and this is sort of the way MMT is portrayed, there's no math. And so this is sort of one stumbling point. And the one thing with fixed income is overrepresented. For macro, within finance, everyone talks about macro, but no one makes money. And very few people make money on macro trades. Equity people are just allocating to different companies. If they're right or wrong with macro economy, doesn't matter. Even in credit, they're making money whether or not a particular firm fails. And a firm can fail even in a booming economy. There's very few people that actually make money off the direction of interest rates. And so even like asset allocators, they're doing equity bonds. So this is, the only people who really worry about is a handful of rates things. So it's a small portion of finance. But the thing is they see, the broad, I'm going to get to that. But then the broad public, it's the exact opposite of the professional audience. They're interested, they're political economy. They not really interested in mathematical models, and they like the theoretical controversy. Professionals would just rather say, oh, I've got this new paper, they want to hear some, oh, this is like a new cutting edge technique, so they can use that in marketing, but they don't really want to hear about the Cambridge Capital controversy. So, and they like online squabbling, social media, and they love things that don't matter for the economic outlook. What is money? Fractional reserve banking, really popular. And so this is the sort of the writing/marketing conundrum. Between those two audiences, if we shove the academics out of there, it's completely different writing style. What we're going after is completely different, and it's a problem. And then say, why does MMT work? Like for finance, Japan, just bring up Japan. That's sort of, pre-MMT. I discovered MMT relatively late, ran Warren Mosler's firm, but he sort of backed out pretty much. It wasn't a hard sell because I covered Japan, and you figure, hey, why didn't Japan fall sick? Basically, MMT said, explain, they gave you a better explanation that you couldn't find anywhere else. Then you have financial crisis, QE, and MMT used to give a distinctive story for that. One sort of final note, it's the problem I have as a writer, the distinction between post-Keynesians and MMT. Technically, MMT is a subset of post-Keynesian economics, and it'd be said, okay, fine, that's great, but there's a bit of squabbling that's high profile. I'm presenting an MMT conference, so I have a little bit of a bias in this, but that doesn't help. This is the sort of thing that is obviously isn't helpful, but I'm going to stay on who said what. But the thing for you sort of the non-MMT people who want to post-cases want to remain distinct from the MMT, they've had a market problem because they generally didn't do as well in the post-crisis environment. To be honest, Minsky is probably, we could sort of say, is a pre-MMT in a sense. He probably got a lot wider following on the post-Keynesians after the crisis. So the way the post-Keynesians have chosen to market themselves, it's very literary, and it doesn't really work for professional eye. That seems to be their problem from a marketing point of view. But obviously, things get better if they're all one big happy family and get along. From the future, obviously I'm trying to sell books. I'm sort of aiming a bit more professional audience, because my daughter says to me, Daddy, why don't you write a book that actually sells a lot? It's like, and basically I do have to hit my broad audience better, and I will do an MMT primer. I was waiting for the textbook, because I wanted to keep the distinction between MMT and post-Keynesian books. Okay, so I was waiting a while for that textbook, and so I was going to do an MMT prior. But that's the thing, is that for the professional audience, what people are going to want, what they want is a sort of a technical survey. They don't want to read a lot of paper. Ideally for a little bit of math, but they don't want to go into the source. No one really wants to say, here's 20 papers, read them. Nobody, they'd rather see a survey, and then if they want to, then they'll go into the literature. Most people do have academic degrees, they can do a literature survey, but you have a time, every job, your main constraint is actually time, so you're not just going to go off and grab papers. So the relatively advanced surveys, that's sort of the real thing that MMT sort of needs for hitting that professional audience. And for the broad public, it's going to be something that chimes with the political economy. And don't ask me about that one. So anyways, I'll pass it on to
Thank you. I have just a few kind of general questions for you guys, and then maybe we can just open it up to questions from the audience who have been fueled with coffee and cookies, and we'll surely have a lot of questions for you guys. The first one is just reflecting on, we're talking about the paradigm shift, right? And I'm just thinking yesterday, we had the government approving this temporary spending bill that will avert a shutdown, at least until November. And the kinds of things we talk about when it comes to the deficit and government spending, it's always, you see the reports every month, every quarter, every year, we're heading towards record debt to GDP in the US, and sort of these alarmist headlines. Also, there's some Canadians on the panel as well. I covered real estate in Toronto for a couple of years, and so that question of household and government indebtedness and the risks of that. So how do we get from that kind of conversation to, how do we open up that conversation? How do we get from that to talking about a deficit in a different way, a more MMT way? And that's for everyone. We're folks going to pass the mic around.
I'll take the first shot, I guess. As a Central Canadian, I give this presentation to members of the opposition Conservative Party, the right-wing party in Canada. While they run on a platform of balanced budgets and fiscal discipline, that is their marketing pitch. They get this concept. But the electorate, and this is the problem, equates a household budget with a government budget, and obviously that's incorrect. So to answer your question, it's not even the political level we need to change this thought process now. I think if you give a politician a chance to spend money, they will, but it's more at the household level where the retail politics come into play, and equating the concept of being a sound fiscal agent, a sound manager of taxpayer money does not equate to running a balanced budget.
My view is that the events are going to overtake the constrained thinking. And what I mean by that is that there was a reason in the late 19th century why trade unions formed, why welfare states formed. And that's because the existing way of doing things, the interaction between people and the economy, didn't deliver what people ultimately wanted. And so those things were formed to deliver things that people wanted. And they had an institutional inertia that's lasted a long time. And what you're seeing now is that the free market, that's what they call it, this era of neoliberalism has promised us so much that privatise all the microeconomic things, to support it by passive fiscal positions, and outsourcing in a political sense of economic policy to central banks at the macro level. That was all bundled up in a narrative and a language and a framing that we were going to prosper from that. And I think that it takes a long time for bridges to start not being, the main bridge across the Rhine now is not functional for trucks. And our health systems around the world are falling. Our school systems are not delivering. Our internal cities are becoming congested by rapacious developers. And if you follow the world news in Sydney now, we've got a number of high-rise apartments that have been abandoned because of dodgy building practices. So all of this put together is not working. And the central bankers are now becoming frustrated and saying it's not working. And so the events are going to the events are going to dictate what we think. We're not going to be the ones to change it, particularly the fiscal policy has to become dominant now. And then there'll be a search for people who said that and provide some guidelines on how it might work.
So I think that the conversation up until now has been mostly, how are we going to pay for it, right? Like someone proposes a policy, the answer is how are we going to pay for it? But now after this news cycle in February and March, you now have, we all have a whole range of literature that you can point people to. That's comprehensible, that's out there, it's a debate. I think that the back and forth between Paul Griffin and Stephanie Kelton, I think can't really be overemphasized in terms of how useful it is. And so I think that moving the conversation past can we pay for it or not, into how do we want to pay, what do we want to pay for? How do we want to use our resources? And I think, these conversations are happening, obviously, but I think that having them in more public spheres, talking about, again, implementing a jobs guarantee, how does that look? Infrastructure is popular with everyone all the time. Sort of moving beyond that, like Bill Mitchell said, I think that talking about what isn't working and how it could work is probably a more compelling story at this point, because I think that how can we pay for it is sort of answered in a way.
The how can we pay for it today? To a certain extent, that's the business press loves that framing, and the editors doing the headlines, they love it, and the readers love it. That's the commercial reality, is that, wow, I guess this is who they're selling the business, who they sell the papers to, give them what they want to hear. And so it's very hard to change that. I would say close to the events on the ground change. I think it's, you have to say, you have reforms that you want to put through. See, my background sort of the prairie populist group, and the prairie populists were right-wing, left-wing movements that rose basically on nothing. They were just mad at Eastern Canadians, and they wanted changes made. They formed a coalition, and they forced changes through. And basically, the nationalized healthcare came out of movement, came out of Saskatchewan. And so, to a certain extent, that's not a political bias, that basically you say, this is what we're mad, we want to do something, and then you build a coalition around it. And then when you get what you want, you go back to the cloud. And to a certain extent, that's sort of my vibe. And so the question is, finding the reform you want and figuring out how to build a coalition. And if you got to get Paul Krugman on board, Larry Summers, it's just, it's politics, it's real politics. How do you win? And that's the thing, is if bringing these clowns in is what you have to do, you bring them in. So that's sort of it's not an intellectually purist view, but for me, winning is superior to being a purist. So I would emphasize the reforms, and I'm less concerned about changing conversation. Really, one of the things in Canada is you have a unified government. There's no the finance minister puts down a budget, and he doesn't have to worry about the debt because he's the one that's setting on it. So you don't have different parts of government blaming each other for debt. So to a certain extent, we don't have the same level of stupidity as the U.S. Sorry.
Just before I ask my next question, I think we've got about 20 minutes, and I just wanted to get a sense of whether people in the audience had a question, if anyone wanted to ask anything right this minute. There's a hand going up. Do we have a microphone that could go out to this gentleman? Or maybe the gentleman can project.
Yeah.
I'm an MMT newbie. My knowledge is what my friend Sam and shared with me on the internet and what I've heard here. I'm just a general person in your general category. I heard our MC say a comment, how can MMT help me make money? I heard Alexandra say, well, MMT is simple to understand and then difficult to understand. I wrote it down. And I heard Glenn say there's a difference between the business, the government side of things, and the personal side of things. My question is, how can we make MMT explainable to people like me, to my mother who's 89, who still wants to help make money for herself to keep living and keep having expenses? How do we do that and differentiate between the government side of MMT and the personal side of MMT? Because what I'm seeing a lot is the government side, the big stuff. How do people like us, who just want to, who have some money, be able to understand MMT? But secondly, because I do work with the homeless and those in need, how can MMT work to help those in need? How can we use the MMT theory to help the people who are out there that don't have money to try to make money? I don't know if this makes sense from the MMT perspective, but you know, are we still in the same ballpark with those people where the have-nots are still going to be the have-nots? I know that's a lot of stuff, but I want to say thank you.
Yeah, those are great questions. I'm not sure, does anyone have a preference for who wants to answer? I know Billy definitely spoken about this before, so wait.
With all due respect, MMT, the work we've developed, has nothing to do with making money. It's about promoting well-being. It's about promoting inclusion and opportunity for people to fulfill whatever they want to do. And so some people might want to make money, but that's not what our work was. Our work was, and I would say it often, it was to provide a lens. These glasses help me see as I get older. And MMT was, the way we constructed it was to create a superior lens to understand the monetary system, which is incredibly opaque to most people, and to provide an understanding for people of what the capacities of the currency government monetary system. Now, what follows from that is that a superior lens allows us to, and I've used the term, penetrate the veil of ideology. So the public debate becomes, if everybody has what I call an MMT understanding, then the public debate has to become much more transparent. Because when you're, presuming the US, when your President Obama some years ago said we've run out of money, well, the whole population would rise up and say that's a lie, if you had an MMT understanding. And the other point about it is that MMT, the way I conceive the work we've developed, is relatively apolitical, in the sense that the lens is the lens, and that's the understanding. But to make that operational in terms of making money, or building better hospitals, or building better urban environments, or mass transport systems, or dealing with climate change, you have to impose a set of values on that understanding, an ideology. And it's very interesting that as this story emerges now, we're getting a lot of interest from people that I would call on the right of the debate, as well as the left. And so, you know, I've been invited to go, we're going to Japan soon to talk to people at the top of the Liberal Democratic Party, the right.
But at the same time, the left are also scheduling events. They're different value sets entirely, and they're making the understanding that we've developed, I think, operational in totally different ways. So my emphasis as someone on the left set of values is about inclusion, about sustainability, about good communities, about good education, good health, and someone who had a single-minded purpose to make money could definitely make more money with an MMT understanding than if you used the work of my mainstream colleagues, who, you know, there's the classic widow make a trade on the Japanese 10-year bond. They just believed the mainstream textbooks and just lost. And people still line up to make that trade. It's, I won't go into the technique, but they believe that they can make money because there will be an opportunity. They keep making losses. So MMT would allow them not to make those losses.
Those are interesting questions because it gets at the political side of things, right? So it seems like MMT in the last year has had so much success in the media and on people's minds. You know, earlier I mentioned the number of billionaires and asset managers and public policy officials who have spoken about this. You had Alexandra Scaggs mention it one time, and then it just kind of exploded at the same time. It does create some risks potentially because you get MMT grouped in with, I mentioned earlier, sort of Green New Deal and socialism and a lot of other concepts. And I'm wondering where, to the gentleman's point, I'm just asking questions, sort of where, so first of all, I'm wondering which of these groups will sort of take the lead in getting this idea out there? Is it journalist responsibility, to Alexandra, to sort of get this out there and get people talking about it? Is it going to come from the government level? Is it going to come from people who are realizing that at its core, as you said, Bill, with the jobs guarantee and everything else, this is really a theory that's supposed to help people. So where do you think the push is going to come from, and are there any actionable steps to getting us there?
Okay, so you need your risky moment, you need your time where the tide goes out, and the great financial crisis was probably a pretty reasonable point in time. Think of it up until that point, sort of beggars were viewed as being omnipotence. Maestro, Chairman Greenspan, had all the answers. And of course, as soon as monetary policy got stuck at the effective lower bound, that was no longer viewed as being something that was actually true. So you need to have, I think, a moment like that, unfortunately. What it's taking now is just more inertia as the world is waiting for the bond markets, sovereign bond markets to blow up. And to your point, Bill, we've been waiting for that in Japan since 1990. It's not happening yet. It's actually getting more and more credibility to the thesis. So I don't know if you have the credibility being built by the lack of bond market blow up, combined with the unknown. That's probably what's out.
Just on that, it's likely in a few years that the interest burden in Japan will turn negative, even though it's got the largest public debt. Now, you can get any mainstream textbook to explain how that works. Their interest burden will turn negative. 247% of GDP gross public debt.
I've been encouraged at movements that we've seen with Bernie Sanders and even on the other side of things, like, on the right and left globally. It seems to be a lot more driven by people, instead of like these sort of gatekeepers or these self-appointed thinker elite. And I think one of the most interesting and cool things about MMT is that it really does sort of give like the power of the purse, I guess, to the people instead of saying like, these bankers tell us that we can't have anything else, so we can't have anything else. And it's been interesting to see the financial press kind of fail to grasp that and only write about it when Wall Street writes about it from like a why can't we make any money sort of perspective. And to be honest, I'm not sure in a lot of outlets today, the way that they're run, that it's going to be particularly easy for the financial press, particularly, to write about it in that way, through a lens of power, just because the way that the establishment is set up is meant, basically, to sort of divert those types of conversations. But there's social media, and you see people doing it every single day. There are blogs, like this is what I was talking about before with the decentralization idea. I think that as media becomes less centralized and massive, that there will be more and more of this, and it will be coming from like the individual person side of things. And leaders can take advantage of that, whether for bad or good. So you gotta hope that it's the good guys who do it. That's pretty much it.
Sort of going to Bill's point, I think sort of the issue is that what you can see is the mainstream has abandoned the view that central banks are limited. So they're at least on sort of a bit more liberal left and Keynesian. There is more accepted fiscal policy. So to a certain extent, there's a convergence on a policy viewpoint towards where MMT is. The question is whether they're going to take credit for all of it and then still work in the least, but we have to be careful because of the bond vigilantes. But the thing is, the social media are keeping people a bit more honest than would have been historically. So to a certain extent, if they are converging on MMT, people will point this out. So maybe there will be, if we're optimistic, there could be progress, but that's essentially the dynamic that I'm seeing now.
I'll just make a couple of comments on the specific question. One of the things that came out last week in Europe, talking to a few of these really quite influential bond firms, and we knew it, but it was interesting here to reiterate it, was that from their perspective, Europe's awash with savings at the moment. There's massive pools of savings doing nothing in their terminology. And what they're saying now is that they're not able to, they're really worried about their future because of the lack of what they would call profitable opportunities to invest. If you look at the viability of some of the large insurance funds and pension funds, they've got what we call a maturity mismatch, and it's growing. In other words, their cash flows relating to their liabilities are not matched with the cash flows relating to their asset structure. And so to try to redress that disjunction, they're taking increasingly risky investment positions on their asset side. And so you've got major insurance and pension funds that are now very exposed to minor changes in market conditions. And if one of the big European pension funds collapses, there'll be chaos. And so what they're saying now is that they've been trying to work out, and you said the policy program, they're trying to work out how they've got into this position where you've got negative deposit rates at the ECB, you've got 10 and 20-year bonds trading at negative rates. They're trying to work out how that's happened and what they've come to. And several of these people have, that's how I got involved with them. They've been searching around trying to work out what the hell is going on here. And what they've concluded is that the period of austerity, fiscal austerity, particularly in Europe and Britain, has killed off investment opportunities for them. And that monetary policy is you're becoming incoherent and inconsistent. So on the one hand, you've got negative deposit rates of the ECB. That means that banks are paying the ECB money for the reserves that they've got in excess. But at the same time, the ECB is running QE, which is pumping reserves, more reserves in that are subjected to penalties. So they're working out that this is an insane situation, and what they are desperate for is investment opportunities, and what they see as the clue to that is fiscal activism. So that's a really important trend that's happening. They're now demanding fiscal policy to become active. Now then you put together the second part of your question about socialism and capitalism and that, which I think you want to tease out a little bit. And one of the big issues constraining the progressive side of politics is the belief that the financial markets are going to close down the currency. This is an incredibly strong orthodoxy in British Labour Party. I've just given some talks in the British Labour Party annual conference last week. And if you then think of, so the argument that has historically governed the Labour Party caution on fiscal activism is that if they dare step a little bit out of the circle, the currency markets will shut them down. Now, if you then put together the current situation of that sort of paranoia, then you see that what the currency markets actually want are larger deficits. They want larger public infrastructure investments that they can leverage on. They're not scared at all. They're desperate for those opportunities, and so the left has got it all wrong. The left should be pushing their governments and their political parties to take very interventionist, stimulus type measures, because that's really what the guys that they fear the most actually want. And that, the last point I'd make on is that on the Green New Deal, all the discussions that we've been having on that are really presenting, in my view, the question that hasn't been asked yet is, can that be accomplished within the current capitalist orthodoxy? And the sort of discussions that we had in Europe last week lead me to believe that we really haven't worked that out yet. My view is that the scale of the changes that are going to be required are not commensurate with the current institutional structure of capitalism.
And on that note, we may have to leave it there. I think we're going to be here all day as well. So if folks have questions, sort of wander up and ask them. And I see trays of food being set up around here. So I think that's sort of the next step. Just want to thank our panelists.
And thank you very much to Katia for moderating, and sorry for the technical issues. Another round of applause for everybody. Thank you for quick housekeeping. The name tags are here, so please pick one up on your way to get food. We'll have about 15 minutes to get food and get settled, and then we're going to get into our lunchtime keynote event. So thank you very much.